I wanted to say is the method or listing presentation method that I employ is the two-step. Go out on initial interview, $5 fine.
Yeah.
And then I come back with the details after I've had an opportunity to conduct the initial interview. When I'm at the initial interview, I leave a package of information. I will have covered most of it in varying levels of detail, depending on the components. Some I just mentioned that it's in the package and read it at your leisure. And for example, I have a bio that I use. I don't spend any time on it whatsoever. I just indicate just before I read the commercial that talks about me is in the back of the package, and read it or not as you choose. I don't really choose to spend much time on that. It just talks about it. I will point out that some of these statistics were as of 1990 or 2007. Last 3 years have kind of screwed up my averages, but I haven't had an opportunity to go back and reevaluate them. So if we want to challenge them, we can. And it just, as bullet points, talks about the various aspects of who I am, what I do, and how I do what I do. The next component of that is materials that I leave having to do with the specific things that I do in order to assist. Oops, here we go. I leave the information on the various components that I utilize in marketing their property. The first part of the package has to do with information brochures. I just selected some at random that I'll click through fairly quickly here. They will be generally tailored to the property type that I'm there. I don't give them a bunch of expensive $2 million waterfront properties when they're a Miller Bay Estates property. They have a little bit of discretion there. And I'll leave these for them to look over. I'll talk about them briefly in terms of how they talk about the various properties so they get an idea of what I'm going to do. The next set is the magazines that I advertise in. And at this point, I generally point out that, unlike Jane, I'm not terribly interested in cold calling. I don't like, Jane, I do prospecting, I just don't do cold calling. For sale by owners, some expireds, but not very many. I do prospecting. I do mail outs to various areas and so on. And at this point, I talk about how I prospect for properties. And then magazines actually have been, for me, an extremely good listing tool. Not necessarily getting the listing, although that helps, but actually having people contact me and want me to talk about listing their property because they like what they saw. I can directly relate. There was 1 year that I did $8 million, eight waterfront properties that were all as a result of 3 flyers that I put out on properties that I had sold just prior to that. So they're a very good source. So I talk about them in classic properties. Obviously, not all properties will qualify. Qualify for this. Some of them, in this particular case, these pertain to the property that I will use as an example when I get further down the road here. Frank, this thing isn't displaying the future stuff. Talk about Homes and Land being on the cover of that, and the waterfront edition of Homes and Land, the full pages, and so on, and go through that very quickly and talk about the various newspaper ads that I've used. This happened to be the Sun. I'm a firm believer in the Home of the Week. There are 6 direct sales that I can attribute to the Home of the Week. So I can probably buy it for the next several years and it will have been paid for.
Hey Terry, what time frame can you attribute the 6 sales to? Is that like the last 2 years or?
over the time that I've used them. I mean, there may have been some earlier, but I started tracking that in the late 90s and paying more particular attention to it than before. And there may even be more, because a lot of people come. I mean, when you get 67, 87 sets of people through, I don't know how many of those, maybe at some point down the road bought something that, you know, that I had marketed, that I was marketing. The one magazine I do spend time talking about in particular is the Puget Sound Business Journal. That's done a tremendous job for me, so I do extol its virtues. And then I give examples of each of the
Do you use your computer? Do you do a presentation like this? Or do you do it
one that doesn't work. This is working, but that's not. Well, anyway, and so I talk about each of the ones that are of particular importance. Not, you know, homes and land pages are homes and land pages. They're nothing special. I did. It's not up there, but I did do one where I worked with the Kitsap newspaper groups to advertise in select areas in Seattle in the local neighborhood papers like the Bainbridge Review, but in Magnolia, etc. And I actually got 2 sales directly out of that, which was pretty good considering I.
Do you use this kind of presentation, or do you use something visual, like a
hard copy?
Hard copy.
I don't. Yeah, I just didn't want to make 50 copies.
Mm-hmm.
Frank's color bill would have been out of sight. Sorry about this. Not my fault.
How are you finding the print media today over the internet? Do you ever use statistics on that, or
no? Well, gut feed. Actually, lately, the last 3 or 4 months, I've been getting a lot of direct calls off of the hard copy media. I don't know why all of a sudden. I would have to say in 08 or 09 and early part of 2010, I got very little activity off of it. It was more, to please the seller, or stroke their ego than be expecting to get direct benefit from it. That's kind of gone by the wayside. Again, going back to the Puget Sound Business Journal, because it gets read by so many business executives, it finds its way in the darndest places. I got a call, or not a call, an email 3 weeks ago from Singapore, from Hong Kong. A gentleman that had seen it in the Puget Sound Business Journal. He has it delivered, I don't know how quickly it gets there, but he has it delivered to Hong Kong and reads it every week, and saw the ad that I had for the Viking Way, if you know that, the Viking Way property, and it's actually made me an offer sight unseen. Didn't quite work for my sellers, but we're still hoping maybe it might. So anyway, that's where we are. All right, so anyway, that's the magazines, and again, I try and display pages that are apropos to the listing that I'm standing in front of, and I don't try and do waterfront for, again, an elevated estates home. Newspaper, same thing. This is, right? Is it working up there? Okay. This one here was the one that I said I used, and I actually got a house sale contingent offer on a little cabin that I had down at Agate Pass on Bainbridge, and then I had an offer for another little Victorian that I had on Bainbridge from some folks in Magnolia, and it came directly from this neighborhood paper, one for Queen Anne, one for Magnolia. Then the last component is personal information, and the reason this one I'll spend just a minute or two on. The reason I did this is I kept going up against some select set of agents whose market time and list to sale price ratios were absolutely abhorrent. In one case, the property had been on the market for over 3 years, and the list to sale price ratio was 50%. To me, that's not, you're not doing your sellers any favor if that's the kind of, you buy the listing and then move it, with getting it sold and support something dramatically less than what you should have expected to begin with. And also their market time. So this comparison, as you can see, I had 6.2% below list of sale price and 162 days versus 31.7 and 293 days. And these are the top 18 or 16 highest sales for the time period that I was recording this. And then the top 14 that I obviously didn't have $18 million plus sales, but my highest dollar value was. So just to kind of point out that there are major differences in terms of what the seller can expect in terms of performance. This was another one that I did. Actually, Brian helped me with this one. Didn't make a lot of sense until he had me redo it. This is $1 million properties in North Kitsap. All the North Kitsap agents, versus me, and how many they've had. I was actually surprised. I expected, for example, Brenda to have more than just a $1 million plus sale. But when I drafted it up, it helps obviously when I'm going in to compete against other well-known agents. A lot of them don't specialize in high-end, and as a consequence, aren't as effective. The rest of them are just letters of reference. One of them I was particularly proud of. This was that one. This is Treasure Island. It had been represented by 3 of the best Bainbridge Island agents, bar none. And then he came to me as a recommendation from a neighbor. And in, I think, 4.5 or 5 months, I got it sold for $1 million. And only because I really knew the property and I knew all of the intricate details of it. And I talked to the city enough to know what they could or couldn't do. And so, nothing like buying your own island in the middle of the harbor in Bainbridge Island.
Who bought that, Teri?
His name is Darren, I don't remember his last name right now, but he owns an insurance agency and an armored car service and something else.
So Teri, what would you say made you sell this over the other agents? Was it the time spent researching it, or was it the marketing you spent?
Well, in this particular case, this is one of my Puget Sound business journals. It went out on Friday. He read it on Monday. He emailed me, or he called me up and asked me if I would show it on Monday afternoon, which I did. Emailed me an offer on Tuesday. We had it signed around on Wednesday. So, couldn't have done. The rest of the stuff leading up to that was kind of intense and expensive, but that made it all worthwhile. So, the other thing that now with John L. Scott, and to some extent me because of using some of these other media, we have some really good online internet tools. This one right here is showing the top 6 internet real estate websites. Realtor.com being number 1. This is AOL, Yahoo, Zillow, Trulia, and Homes.com. By advertising in Homes and Land, you get into, which can be a bit of an irritant, can get into Trulia. Now, John L. Scott, does it go to Trulia? No. Okay, so that's through Homes and Land. Zillow is both Homes and Land and John L. Scott. And was it Yahoo? And then Yahoo is through John L. Scott. So basically, I can honestly say that I put them in 5 of the 6 highest volume websites. Not talking about the John L. Scott website or some others if they're of particular bent.